Welcome back to the MB2 Underground, where today, while the mics are live, the green room is empty. No guests, no advisors, no investment bankers telling us that we should circle back after diligence. While you may be stuck with the second and third choice hosts, as Sarah's still out on maternity leave, we found a topic near and dear to our hearts that I think will probably resonate with a good majority of those who listen. I'm JT, and I'm joined by the one and only Joe Fox.
What's up, JT? I'm actually not the one and only. There are like a lot of Joe Foxes.
Really?
Oh, yeah, my dad being one, my grandfather being another. Yeah.
So are you like a Joe Fox the fifth?
We don't do that, but yeah, there's a bunch of us.
But you could be.
So anyway, yeah, I still don't know what the Fox says, but
when I had my first son, I thought about naming him Jonathan Christopher Tyroch Jr. And I was like, man, I think that would be kind of cool. And then we decided not to, but
your wife decided not to.
She was, I don't know if she was supportive. That's going to be very true.
But
yeah. So
see, but
likewise, man, I know today's format's a little different. Can you tell the listeners, like, what are we talking about today? And why is it just you and me?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're on the business development team here at MB2. I'm on the business development team here at MB2. In our capacity in that role, right, our job is to interface with potential partners, tell them the story, learn about their practice, see if a partnership makes sense for them, right? In that capacity, we speak to, 2,000 to 3,000 potential partners a year, right? So we have learned a tremendous amount from the private practitioner community, their hopes, their aspirations, their concerns, their fears, their pain points, right? But we've also learned what their understanding of the industry is, what their understanding of the process, right, to consider a transition is. And so today, you and I are just going to kind of rap about kind of those most common considerations that private practitioners need to think through if they want to evaluate a transition now or in the future.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great kind of a great summary, and it's something that, like I said in the intro, is near and dear to our hearts. It's something we do every single day. So hopefully today will be informative. We've put together for the listeners, watchers out there that haven't been able to attend either a webinar or a CE, we've put together both CE and a webinar that is, related to or very similar to some of the content we're going to cover today. We're not going to cover it in as much detail, but there will be opportunities for anyone who's interested to join or to learn more after the fact. So
yeah, quick plug, March 24th webinar, link to the registration will be in that. So JT, I'm going to start by asking you the question, what is the most important thing that a private practitioner needs to think about, consider when evaluating a transition?
Yeah, great question. The most important thing is defining their why.
What's a why?
Well, it's first and foremost, it's going to guide the entire process for the doctors. But the why is like, why am I even considering this? For all intents and purposes, we find ourselves in a very fortunate spot often that the doctors who gravitate towards MB2 have relatively successful practices, and they are looking for something on an operational level. There are some doctors who I know we've encountered that come in and like their why is I'm overwhelmed and I'm looking for relief. Sometimes, that can be met in a partnership. Other times it's met with a different, model, which we're going to get into. But, that is going to guide everything that the doctor does from that point forward. So if you don't have a why and you don't understand why you're even doing it, I mean, maybe it's I'm looking for the ability to monetize some of the equity that I've built in my practice. I'm looking for administrative relief and operational support. I'm looking to retire. I am looking to recruit an associate. I am looking to expand locations, and I've never done that before, or I have done it before, and I don't want to do it again by myself. So there are a bunch of different whys that are out there, a bunch of common ones. But, those are going to essentially lead and direct towards groups that may or may not be a good fit. And it's going to make your time spent way more efficient than saying, I don't know what my why is. I'm going to go talk to 100 groups or 30 groups out there and then try to figure it out. That's a real bad way of approaching a transaction with something that you've built, and it's essentially your life's work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge decision, right? So if you're gonna get married, you're gonna know what your why is. You're gonna have babies, whatever. You go to the gym, you're gonna know what your why is, right? It's your North Star.
Beach muscles, baby. Spring
Beach
breaks right around the corner.
Guns out. But yeah, great point.
What did I miss any common whys or motivations?
No, I think you hit on the main ones. I would just add that, your why is very unique to you, very unique to the seller, and it can be a combination of all the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't have to just be one. And oftentimes, actually, I describe it to doctors I talk to on the phone like this. It often changes, right? You might start with one why. It may be, I'll use this as an example. It may be, I've built a massive practice. I'm never going to be able to sell this thing by itself to a solo doctor. I'm looking to monetize some of my equity, right? And diversify my risk, essentially. Well, you do that, you go in with that, and then all of a sudden you realize, wait a second. And I'll use MB2 as an example. Obviously it's an MB2 podcast, but it's something that we know the most about because it's our model and it's just how we operate. I find guys that start with that can look up and say, wait a second, you guys are talking to me about income repair. So you're telling me I can diversify, I can make the same amount of money, if not more, and we have an opportunity to grow and potentially do even better together than we were by ourselves. Now all of a sudden you move from just diversification to operational efficiency, administrative support, and so on and so forth. So I think, to your point, which is a really good one, it's not just a solo static, here's the reason why. It may be a jumping off point, but not one that's, it's not static, it's dynamic.
No, that's a great point as well. And like you said, the more you learn, and one of the reasons we're doing this, right? The more that doctors learn, right? The more they can kind of really hone in on what matters most to them.
I will say this, and I want to say that there's nothing wrong with exploring and trying to understand. We have talked about how the industry's changed a bunch. There's new groups coming out of the ground, seemingly left and right, or at least there were. Now there's a lot of groups going back into the ground, unfortunately. But yeah, right. But so there is a lot out there to learn and to understand, and so there's no problem with not knowing your why right away if you don't understand the groups that are out there. But when you are getting serious about moving towards a transaction or a partnership, you absolutely have to have that as an anchor point. It's kind of like a company that has a mission statement, right? Like you've got to have that mission statement. Now it may take, let me go have a conversation with these guys and with those guys and hear what they're about and just kind of begin to formulate like what could my why be, or where could it land? Like that's a totally appropriate approach. So listeners out there, don't hear me say, if you don't have a why, don't do anything. I think it's always good to learn, but before you really start moving down the path in earnest, you need to know why you're moving down the path.
And the process isn't always easy, logistically, emotionally, right? So if you're anchored on that why, if you have that as your North Star, it gets you through those times that aren't super easy.
Absolutely. So Joe, I mentioned that, you just said North Star, which is great, but kind of the anchoring point, which leads you to understanding and maybe being more efficient in your process with your time. How does a why lead you to understanding what group or what model, what groups or models may be a good fit for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Look, the most important thing for doctors to understand right now is that there has never been more options, right, for them to accomplish their transition goals, right? The classic sell to another private practitioner associate is still an option, still happens often, right? I think it's become a little bit more challenging for the younger generation of clinicians. They're coming out of school with an exorbitant amount of dental school debt, generally speaking. And there's competing buyers out there, right? The DSOs, right? So again, private practitioner option still there. The classic DSO approach, 100% buyout. You sell your entire business to the DSO. They then take over. You work back as an employee, right? That is still exists. Like you said, many DSOs, over 200 DSOs currently, 32, which you also mentioned, ish of which are in some form of financial distress. That's another topic for another day. But many options, many groups, and this is where, like you said, if you understand your why, you're going to get into the right group if that is the path for you.
Mhm.
And then, a third option, and we could split this up into kind of more than just 3 buckets, but
Sure.
third option is a group, for example, a dental partnership organization that is a joint venture structure, right?
Yep.
Much different model. You're not an associate in the practice. You're literally taking on a partner, a thought partner, a financial partner. In the MB2 model, the doctor partners retain operational and clinical autonomy, which is, very important to some clinicians we speak with, a lot of clinicians we speak with. And so that's a much different approach, much different model, right? Different financial outcomes, but also different kind of future financial outcomes. And then operating, day-to-day operations are quite a bit different. So 3 kind of big buckets of options, but within those, there are many different varieties,
Yeah.
right?
No, absolutely. I think there's, since I've been here over the last 7 years, I mean, I think we've seen a stronger push towards, the last option, the partnership where there is alignment between, we'll say, the larger organization and the doctors or the practices because of the successes that, that type of structure or group has experienced.
Yeah.
Certainly that's how we're structured. And that alignment, I think, you and I would both agree that it's incredibly important going forward. Now, that being said, it is not it's not the only option. I want to start with doc to doc, traditional, what I think most doctors have always viewed as that's what they're going to do. I'm going to work until I'm 65 or 60, and I'm going to sell to my associate at, 60, 70% of collections, and I'm going to move off into the sunset. Maybe we can go through each, of the 3 options and talk about maybe what whys, what anchors, what North Stars fit those 3. So if we did start with, a doc to doc, what's maybe a motivation that would lead to that option?
Yeah, I would say maybe a legacy practice. You have a son, daughter who's a dentist and is in the practice and wants to take over the practice. And maybe you took it over from your parents at some point. And I think that matters a lot. That's a great why to like to continue that legacy, right? And so, that would be kind of one of the main options. Maybe you have just a rock star associate who's been in your business with your business in your practice for years, and you long time ago had that conversation and they expressed interest in ownership. Another great reason to transact in that private to private manner.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. I mean, obviously in that example, right, you are selling at least a large portion, if not all at one time. I mean, I think we've seen it structured and at least had conversations with docs that, hey, I'm going to sell my associate 50% of the practice, and then there's going to be another 50% that I'll sell a couple years later, and eventually I'm working myself out of the practice as the associates working themselves in. But oftentimes it is in one fell swoop, it is one chunk, and it is, I would say, kind of a retirement or an off ramp, right? So that's one of the options. Middle option that you'd mentioned, the what I'll call traditional DSO, where it is a holdco model or a buyout model, meaning DSO comes in, buys 100% of the practice. So you are now no longer the owner of the practice. You have monetized. What might that be? Because that sounds a lot like the first option. So what might be motivation? What motivations might lead you to that middle option, number 1, and number 2? How's that different than selling to another doctor?
Yeah, good question. I think what we have seen, and you've been here at MB2 longer than me, have been here for 5 years, but you're pushing, I think, what, 7, 8? Yeah. We've seen a lot larger, many more monster-sized practices, right? The 5 million, 10 million, 15, 30 million. We partnered with a $30 million revenue business not too long ago. And those businesses are very hard to be passed on or acquired by another private practitioner. It's just the the complexity of the business, but also like the financing. Like it's not possible, right? And so it's a good problem that modern clinicians have created for themselves when they're, you're doing 5 million revenue. Like it's going to be very hard for another individual to buy that practice, right? So therein lies, a great option with a DSO, and there's 100% buyout. And maybe you're at a stage in your career that you don't want to be making decisions at your practice. Maybe you want to focus, chairside, and you really want to continue to be a clinician for a few years. Maybe not that long. Maybe you're, mid 60s, kind of the end of your career. That's a great option for you, right? If that's what you want to do. You get the cash in your hand, you work back for a few years, and then you, again, like you said, ride off into the sunset.
Do those structures with the traditional DSO, with the doc, like you said, doc, you're having a transaction, and then you're oftentimes like transaction occurs on a Friday, and I'm gone on Monday.
Yeah.
I mean, I know obviously there's continuity and legacy that you want to leave, and so oftentimes those types of transactions are years in the making. But with a traditional DSO, sounds like typically there's some sort of string attached to an extent where you might get some of the money up front, and maybe more. You may get more money up front than you would certainly selling to another doctor because of the economics that you mentioned. But is it all up front typically, or is it kind of a installment payment?
No, it depends. It depends on the group. Some groups are going to be 100% up front. Some groups are going to be 100% cash up front. Some groups are going to be, we'll give you 90% of the value of the business up front in cash, and then, hey, 10% of that we're going to hold back for a period of years until you fulfill your work back, your quote unquote associateship, to make sure you stay around, or to make sure the practice hits certain targets, all right, that maybe were laid out or agreed to. In some DSO approaches, what we'd call a holdco model, they're going to buy 100% of your business, but you're not going to get 100% of the proceeds in cash. You're going to get 20-ish, 30% in equity in the business at large. So you're still not incentivized for your practice to perform a certain way per se, but you now have a piece of the business at large, the group at large, right? So stock in the DSO, so to speak, right? So again, kind of all goes back to what your why is and what you're really focused on the most. And again, with so many groups out there, there's a group for everybody, for everybody's why, for sure.
Yeah, and there's no wrong answers too to the why. I mean, I think we all have reasons that we do things, and none better than the next. And so, hey, the opportunities are there. I think it's great to be able to talk through, the similarities and the differences, just so as people are exploring, they have a little bit more information on, oh, okay, I do understand I'm going to get it all in cash from my associate. I do understand that I'm going to have some requirements to make sure I'm getting everything that I agreed to with a traditional group, typically at least. But okay, now the third option, the kind of joint venture model, I'll say obviously what we do here at MB2. Can you explain that in a little bit more detail for our listeners? And then what might lead, what motivations might lead to finding a partnership organization?
Yeah, great question. So the DPO approach is going to be, DPO means two kind of big things, right? Economic joint venture. So typically group's going to purchase 51 to 60% of your business. You're going to keep the remaining, 40% of the business, and you become partners in the quote unquote classic sense, right? And so somebody wants to take on a partner, but still keep a very significant portion of the business, knows that the business with a partner has more potential, right? That's a common, commonality of those that are attracted to the DPO model. Typically they're in a certain stage of their career where they've got, 10 plus years left. But again, they've gotten to that plateau and they're like, I've hit that wall, I hit that ceiling. I know that there's more to do here, but I need help. I need administrative support. I need help recruiting. I need help with a HR team, a legal team, finance and accounting team, things that are taking them away from either being chairside, mentoring associates, or just being entrepreneurs, right? And kind of thinking about your business, like working, on your business instead of in your business is kind of that common, buzz phrase. But yeah, I think that's the commonality of folks that are attracted to the DPO. They know there's more, but they need help to get there.
Yeah. I might challenge you just a little bit on the, typically being a, 10-year timeline, right? I know from my experience, we get a lot of folks that come in not with a 10-year timeline that end up saying, man, I've done this a lot longer because it helps to sustain, their ability to continue on. Dare I even say in some cases it's made working fun again. But we've got partners here that are in their mid 60s. We've got partners here that are in their early to mid 30s. So I think, to your point, I think the partnership aspect, while it will attract a certain group of folks or a certain potential, I'll call it partner in this case, because that's what you're doing. You're partnering with an organization. The wide-ranging motivations could be wide-ranging simply because it could be a guy. I think of one of our partners here in the DFW area who he came in and his goal was ultimately to transition his practice well. He knew he had a few years left of practice, but his goal was, I want to transition. That sounds a lot different than, the 42-year-old who says, hey, I've built this practice. I've got an opportunity to add a second location. I want to do that well. Yep. Or how can I be more efficient? Those two are, vastly different, but at the same time can be solved by the same
approach.
So when we think about this partnership approach, are all partnership groups the same? Or maybe what are some of the similarities and differences between the partnership groups that are out there?
Yep. I would say the operational capabilities, their ability to actually add value to the practice is vastly different.
That seems to be a really important point, right? For the folks out there listening, right? As you're exploring groups, it's understanding not only if I'm partnering for a specific purpose or with some goals and aims in mind, it's really to do some diligence on that, right? To understand, hey, what does separate this group from that group, or this one from the next.
Yeah, like can they actually execute on the support that they're promising? Like why else would you want to partner if you're partnering with somebody who's not going to add value, right? Like it doesn't make sense. So anyway, infrastructure. Do they have the infrastructure? What is their tenure? How long have they been around? Those things are great questions to ask to really understand if the group will be able to support you. And I'd say the other one is operational control, right? Even in some DPO models, the group is in charge, and for some doctors, that's what they want, right? They don't want to be making daily decisions. Our model quite a bit different. Our doctors are pretty passionate about maintaining that operational autonomy. So, again, those are the questions asked. Those are the things that think through. Like what? Again, going back to your North Star, your why. What do I really want my day to look like? What do I want my lifestyle to be? What am I passionate about?
What's important to me? What am I trying to accomplish? You can always go back to that.
So JT, once doctors kind of figured out kind of where their path is, what kind of general group and kind of what the things that you really care about, what's next, man? Like where do they go from here?
I would characterize the next kind of stage or step with one word, and that would be diligence. I think the conversation we're about to have is probably going to evolve into talking through the actual process. But what the listeners are going to find is it is a process of diligence, and that's not just diligence by the group or the groups. It's diligence by the doctor and the group, right? So it's trying to understand, is this a good fit. We think based on, if I'm a doctor, I think this group might be a good fit because I've defined my why. I understand that this seems attractive to me, but now I've got to figure out, is this the right group within my smaller subsection
Yep.
or subset? So diligence would be what I would say happens next. And in diligence, in typical fashion, when we talk about transactions or exploration or research into an organization, or in this case, organizations, requires information. So the first thing I would say as the next step is to make sure that, if you're looking to do something and explore, you've got to have documents, financials, operational documents, potentially tax documents, and then some other, I'll say, finer items ready to go, or at least prepared so that the group or groups that you're exploring with can start to understand your business while you are working on the qualitative side, understanding their business.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of those finer like documents that
Yeah.
any group would need to
So,
look at?
so when we talk about financial documents, we're talking about things as simple as, profit and loss statement, balance sheet, those basically operational, or well, not operational, but statements that will reflect the operations of the practice from a financial perspective. Okay, you would get those from maybe your internal bookkeeping, QuickBooks, your CPA, tax returns are a great resource as well, although sometimes those are maybe a little too or not detailed enough, right? I think really and truly for a group to understand and or try to understand the business, they should be asking for more than just a tax return.
Yeah.
But those are the financial documents to get things kicked off and going, and I would expect there to be some back and forth, understanding or questions going back and forth to understand and better reflect what the operations actually are. I think we know that lots of doctors, they're solo practitioners, or they are the sole owners of the business, and they have the ability to run personal, expenses or personal items through the practices. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's dinners with folks as they're talking about business, but there could be things that could be easily identified as, oh, that is a operational expense in one regard, but really and truly it's maybe a little bit more personal. So having some back and forth there to understand, what does this business actually look like and operate as going forward, is really an important part. And oftentimes I think we see doctors do that with, for us, for instance, like they'll do that with us. We will go back and forth. We will iterate. I've always viewed the magical number that doctors have probably always heard about it, EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's just another fancy way of saying, okay, what is there to be sold? What are the earnings of the business? After the doctor gets paid, what's left? What's left to be distributed, in our case, between the partners? That's a number that really shouldn't have a ton of conversation about. I view it really as, I view it really as black and white. There may be a few things here or there that are gray, like, oh, I think, CE on average, I do $5,000 or $7,000 a year CE, but you know what? I'll pay that out of pocket, whatever it might be. But I don't view that as a very squishy number.
Yeah, no, it should be easy to figure out. It's revenue minus expenses is your profit. Buzzword for
plus any personal expenses, things that you're running through the business, and there you go, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the financial side, and what's really important about that is that's going to be one of the main inputs on valuation.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to come back to valuation, or we can come back to valuation in a second. On the operational diligence side, you should expect to have documents pulled out of your practice management software. So your EagleSoft, your Dentrix, your Open Dental, your Curve, whatever it might be. You're going to pull out productivity reports, perhaps payer reports, patient reports, understanding new patients active patients, those types of things. So you're gonna have a bunch of documents that should be pretty easy to pull for a group to understand, okay, not only what does the financial picture look like in this practice, but now what is the patient makeup? What is the dentistry mix? What is the payer mix? All while trying to understand those things in conjunction with one another on a basis of what is the risk here? I'd like to talk about some of those risks
Yeah.
and things that, in just a second. But let me finish with the third piece, which is, I would say, your kind of legal diligence. So these are the finer, kind of the lost paperwork, maybe a lease, maybe the articles of incorporation or an operating agreement. Those types of documents are the kind of final piece as you're looking through. And again, this is on the front end as you're looking through and trying to really determine what would a proposal look like, right? So in our process, we ask for that up front. And while it sounds daunting, as I've just explained it, it can really be pared down to just a few items that should buoy or facilitate the conversation to get to a proposal, right? So as we're getting to a proposal, Joe, I've talked about the three kind of areas for diligence, and we mentioned EBITDA being a really big component of valuation. What's the other component of valuation typically?
Yeah, I mean, there's many things that go into the equation to create the total valuation of the business. But like you said, you start with the profit of the business. Again, buzzword for that is EBITDA. And then you apply a multiple of that EBITDA, and that multiple is, again, coming from a variety of things: the size of the business, the market, the number of patients the business has, the number of operatories. Maybe there's additional capacity for operatories. Maybe there's some other opportunity to add space, to grow in that market. Those things kind of all go into that magic equation. Every group's a little bit different on how they approach it, but I'd say a multitude of things. Size matters. Size is a big one.
I always like to describe it as, the EBITDA may be a number that we both agree is not squishy. It's relatively discrete. Multiple is where maybe a little bit more of the art evaluation comes into play, right? The science being the EBITDA, the art being the multiple. And I've always said the multiple is really just a measurement of risk.
Exactly.
Right? It's inverse, right? The higher the risk, the lower the multiple. The lower the risk, the higher the multiple.
Yeah.
When we think about, and this isn't a podcast on valuation, but at the same time, valuation is a big part of the proposal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody, if you're considering selling your practice in totality or at least in part, money is important. The value may be found outside of just the initial valuation and initial consideration, but let it be known, like, we all understand you should be, and we champion this. Like, you should be proud of what you've built, and you should be comfortable with the proposal that reflects the true value of not only what you've built, but also what is, the opportunity going forward. So when we think about valuation and we think about risk and measuring the risk on the multiple side, what are some of the things that might raise the risk or lower the risk? I know you've already kind of hit on a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say a business has a lease that's about to expire, in 6 months. That's a problem, right? Because if that lease is not able to be renewed and that practice is going to have to physically move, it's one of the biggest risks to a dental practice, is having to physically move, right? Can you find a space of a similar cost in your market? And hey, can your patients find that space, right? And so that's just a complication. It's not cheap to actually physically move.
Have I ever told you one of, like, this has actually never come up before, but like striking a chord with me is having to move. One of the first practices I ever worked with when I got here to MB2 in 2019, great doc, good practice. And I'm excited because I'm a new guy. I'm like, yeah, man, let's go. Let's get this partnership. And then he drops this on me. Oh, by the way, the state has come and claimed eminent domain.
Yeah.
We're going to have to move the practice. I think they were building a highway or something through. And man, you want to talk about, I was sky high excited, and I just went,
Yep.
Mm,
Boom.
oh,
Pixelated blue.
yep, yep.
So I'd say that's a big challenge or obstacle to transitions happening, right? Transactions happening. I'd say the biggest challenge and
Mhm.
obstacle, quite honestly, is disorganized or messy information, right? Disorganized, messy financials, disorganized, messy production reports. A doctor doesn't know how to pull their, for you Dentrix fans, your analysis summary provider report, EagleSoft, a provider productivity report, right? Understand how to do those
Mhm.
things. And as it relates to your financials, your P&L, understand what personal expenses you have running through the
Yeah.
business. Understand what your financials are saying. Numbers tell a story, right? A P&L tells a story, and all P&Ls can be translated into a story. All stories can be kind of translated back into numbers, right? So understand the story and then be able to explain that story, right? The more prepared you are, the more efficient and quicker the process will go, but then also the more you can advocate for your valuation,
Yep.
right? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to get compensated for a business you've built either from scratch or you took over and with blood, sweat, and tears, right? So again, expiring leases, unclear financials, I'd say payer concentration. So a practice
Mhm.
that's
Yep.
80% Medicaid, not to pick on Medi-Cal, but there's about to be some significant cuts in California Medicaid reimbursements this summer. So a business that is, it's customer
What's
concentration.
what's the risk, whether it's Medicaid or uh, any singular payer, the VA? Yeah, I know we've seen that here, or Delta, or what is the risk there? Like, explain to the listener, just in case there's some folks out there like, okay, why is that risky? What is the risk there?
Yeah, if something were to happen with that, just any business you have, if there's a hamburger shop and they have just one customer, if something happens to that customer, then there goes your business. So with concentrated payers, it's what we call stroke of the pen risk. If
That
states have to balance their budgets, unlike the federal government, and so if California needs to balance their budget and they go to cut Medicaid reimbursements on the adult side or even on the pediatric side to balance budgets, which some states have already had to do, then immediately that stroke of the pen that, state legislatures decides, hey, reimbursements are going down, that practice's revenue goes down immediately. And so like that's something to be aware of, right? A more diversified customer base will get you a better valuation. It's less risk to your risk equation. So it's a big one. It's a big obstacle we see.
I loved what you said about organized financials and understanding where and maybe what the personal expenses are that are running through.
Mm.
Um, it's been my experience, or at least maybe my general feel, right? I think there've probably been more doctors that know but don't exactly know where some of those things exist,
Yep.
and they've probably left a decent amount of
Totally.
money on the table. I'm working with a doc right now, and he and I are going back and forth trying to be very as precise as we can, because he's like, hey, I know that this is in there, I just don't know exactly where it is. So I'm connecting with this CPA saying, look, tell me where this is so we can
Yep.
pull it out. Is that clearly it is a
Yep.
personal expense, but those are things like, if you've got a good understanding on the front end, not only will the process be quicker and more efficient, but I think it shows really well for doctors too, right? When I get off the phone with the doctor and I send an information request and they've got things ready within, gosh, it doesn't have to be 24 hours, but like within a couple of days, like that to me says, okay, this doc is serious, understands what he or she is looking for, and really does want to explore this. And it gives me just that little extra oomph in, all right, now I've got the information. Now it's on balls in my court. Like, I need to get back to these docs, or this doctor, because he or she is relying on me to begin asking the questions so we can move the process. Like,
Yeah.
so I think that shows incredibly, incredibly well. And it kind of, to our perspective, almost gives an indication of what would partnership look like. I know that's what
100%.
we typically are really trying to understand on the front end, is what does and what would partnership look like with a doctor?
Yeah, it exhibits a sophisticated business owner, and everybody wants to partner with a sophisticated business owner, right? And again, that will impact your valuation, right? Every time you interface with a group or whoever the buyer is, you have an opportunity to quote unquote sell yourself, right?
Yeah.
To present well, or unfortunately, on the flip side, you have the opportunity to not present well,
Yep.
right? And that matters. That all matters.
We when you think about telling your story, right? Like it's no different. I'm sure many of the listeners have heard about recapitalizations, private equity involvement. When MB2 is recapitalized, like that process is we're telling a story. We're telling a story to the market. So, I mean, take MB2 out of it. Any business that's out there looking for an outside investor, it's how well can I tell the story and explain not only who we are, but what the opportunity is going forward. And it's no different in this case, right? It's a smaller scale. It's not a big, as big of an organization, but the kind of core principle is the exact same. So I think that's a really good point to highlight that you've brought up.
Yeah, and look, I think the main message from my perspective on what we're trying to communicate today is awareness. The more aware you are, the better. What does G.I. Joe say? Like, prepares or whatever. But I know I grew up with it too, right?
It's really funny. I was going to give you a really hard time about not remembering that, and I have just blanked. So I can't even
It's
get
my fault because I thought
I was going to say knowledge is power, but or the more you know, but that was something different.
But the more you know, also from that generation.
Yeah.
But really, truly, the more you know, the better, the easier this process will be, and quite honestly, the higher your valuation will be as well.
Yep. So the question that you asked, which is, how can we best prepare? And I talked about maybe getting into the actual, process. That starts the process for the listeners out there. It's gathering the information, doing diligence. The diligence is going to culminate with a proposal, a letter of intent. And there will be meetings and there will be conversations, and there should be. And you should continue to seek out those conversations, understand from a qualitative perspective who you may be partnering with or selling to, and from a quantitative perspective, what is the actual current economics in consideration? What is the opportunity going forward? That culminates, you find a match, and you get an LOI put together that outlines, the finer details or points, of what going forward looks like. Joe, I know we've talked for a while. I kind of feel like that's a good stopping point for us here, because it gives, obviously there's challenges and there's risks and there's things in that transaction process from the LOI to getting the partnership or the transaction closed, but kind of think we should leave those for the...
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more. We've got, again, 2 webinars coming up live. It's a great format, March 24th, and then also on April 22nd. So look out for those. We'll have some other exceptional folks with us, and we're just going to have a chat about some of these items, but in a lot more depth, and then some additional items that doctors need to be aware of.
Perfect. Well, MB2 Undergrounders, I believe we'll put links to those webinars in the show notes as well, whether that's on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts. You should be able to find it. You can also go to the MB2 website for more information.
Yeah. Listeners, thank you for joining us for another great episode of the MB2 Underground podcast.